Moonshine Jesus, the bright sky. Moonshine Jesus, baby, alright. Moonshine Jesus, a surprise and delight. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello, and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show. You have joined us for our special Father's Day edition. And speaking of fathers, there's one on the other side of the mic from me. Hello, David. I heard your little ones in the background there.
Yeah, it's summer break here, and so we are having a good time hanging out. And we just actually got back from the beach, so I've been having good father time. So
Nice.
I'm feeling very daddy-ish. If that's a
Daddy-ish.
I don't know. Anyway, so what dads do when they get together is they normally have a drink together.
Drink, yeah, absolutely.
I'm still drinking coffee because it's a continuous thing for me. But what about you, Mark?
I'm on a little vacation too, so I'm actually going to go ahead and open one up. This is a special one. The special one I've been saving. It's by Harveston Brewery. It's called Ola Dub, which really means black oil. This thing has been aged.
Yeah, and that's my
speaking
son
of little ones, there. Hey, Will.
Speaking of little ones and dads, that's my son come by to say hello to all of our audience members. So that's my oldest. He's a good kid. So okay, so you've got a black oil. You're drinking black oil.
Yeah, it's called Old Dub.
It's
It's been aged in six barrels that age 16-year-old bourbon.
Oh my god!
And then on top of it, I've aged this one 5 years. So this one was bottled in 2011.
Well, while you're opening that up and giving yourself your first pour, I actually have something special for us together on stage at the Wild Goose, which is coming up in July. We'll be on stage Friday at 4:30 p.m.
Correct.
And I have saved my last two bottles of the hard to find, even harder to not drink, Cold Mountain.
Oh, excellent! That's a very nice
Highland
brew.
Brewing Company up here. So
it's a very
I've
nice
got
brew.
The 2016 edition that we can share on stage together, and we hope you guys will join us there. So, all right, how is it, Mark?
Let me try it. See. Oh my god, that's unbelievable. That's about the smoothest beer I've ever had. That's amazing that a bourbon barrel aged is that. I think it's the 5-year aging on it, but yeah, it's delicious. But that's neither here nor there. We're going to be on the stage.
It takes a lot of patience to age a beer for 5 years.
It does. It really does.
So yeah, so we're going to be on stage, and we also have goodies to give away.
That's right. We got handouts.
Yeah, that's right.
They might be a little logoed. Might be a logoed item.
Maybe a logo item. They may be in vein with some of our themes. So definitely come and check them out. Get there early. Get a giveaway because we only have a few to give away.
Yeah, it's only a certain amount. Yeah. So listen though. Also, if you haven't got your tickets yet and you want to get a little break, we can offer you a little discount here. 25% off on the Wild Goose tickets if you enter Goosecast 2016 at checkout. So hey, don't say we never gave you anything.
It's really hard not to say who's your daddy right now since we're doing a Father's Day episode. But it would just be bad.
I guess so, probably.
Anyway, so it is Father's Day coming up, and I don't know. As a father, do you notice differences in the way we tend to celebrate Father's Day from Mother's Day?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
How do you see those differences playing out culturally? Like they just have different flavors and tones to me.
No, I completely agree. I mean, you take something as simple as a church. On Mother's Day, like your traditional church is going to have flowers that they give to the mothers and that kind of thing, and there'll be a special moment where all the mothers stand up and all of that kind of stuff. And on Father's Day, maybe somebody will say Happy Father's Day to you.
Or you might get the message of be a better father. Like I've been
true.
In like that. Where on Mother's Day you get the message about how mothers are wonderful and beautiful and awesome, and then on Father's Day you get the message of you need to be a better father.
You know, it's interesting that we can't be a little more broad with the way that we describe those two things in churches and in our regular life, just in that, you know, there's plenty of people who had mothers that have hurt them horribly and plenty of people who have had fathers who have hurt them horribly. And we all need to be particularly when we're talking in a group of people. I mean, if you're talking one-on-one with someone and you happen to know their mom or dad, that's one thing.
Right.
But when you're talking to a congregation, it's so essential to recognize that not everybody has positive image of mother or father.
Not only that, but you also have people who have been mothers or fathers who may not have biological children, but who have acted as mothers or fathers within the congregation in very important and real ways. And so, to be able to honor that as well.
Absolutely.
We're also moving into a time period where people are delaying child rearing,
Right.
and having kids. So you're increasingly having people in their 40s or 50s who don't have kids by choice.
That's correct. And
and
then you also have the people who aren't practicing what you would think of as sort of the traditional in terms of American way of a family household,
right.
where mom is the big breadwinner and dad stays home and makes sure that the kids are all right and that everything, So I mean, we're seeing a shifting in roles that goes along with parenting, but we're not seeing the cultural response all the time recognizing that.
Well, and especially from a lot of churches. I mean, I have noticed, because I was a stay-at-home dad with my kids for several years before I went back to work with the priesthood. And what I noticed different now from then is I see a lot more advertisements where dads are doing primary child rearing, like laundry or
Right.
household chores or things like that. And so there's a lot more tender images out there right now, fatherhood, than I remember seeing pretty much ever, in a way. But still, it seems like within the church and within a lot of churches, there's a very masculine idea of what it means to be a dad, and a very typically traditionally feminine idea of what it means to be a mom. When I see it play out in my own family and in families of people around me, that's just not the case anymore. That roles are in flux and switching, and I think that's a good thing. I think that's a healthy thing.
It's exactly what it should be. I mean, because there's such a diversity in masculine and feminine attributes in each of us. I mean, it's not either this or that. There's this giant continuance. I mean, it's hard for me to be in a house where I'm not probably one of the better cooks. So
right.
I love cooking,
Well, I mean, and then there are those moments where you kind of play into that traditional stereotype of the bumbling dad. Like, I remember the first time that I was at home with my new infant son by myself, and my wife had gone back to work, and I was changing my first solo diaper without, adult supervision around.
Okay, I need to stop us right here and say women never talk about changing their first diaper. It's only guys that talk about the first.
I was a younger brother. I never babysat, never did any of that stuff.
Right.
And so, I'm changing the diaper, and I'm doing great, and I'm really proud of myself. And I pick my son up and whack him on the head. And the thing you should never do as a new parent, and this goes for men or women, you should never Google the concussion symptoms of infants, because you will spend the next 6 months checking to make sure your child's pupils dilate.
Yes.
I don't know. That's maybe from personal experience. It may not be from personal experience.
You may or may not have been through this event.
Yes, exactly. So, I remember calling my wife and saying, I think our son has a concussion.
And she said, "Do you think you know how you did it?"
and I think her response was something like, "I think you may be overreacting." And it was true. She was correct. My son did not have a concussion, and I did not give him a concussion by gently bumping his head against the diaper changing table by accident. So, I mean, there are those things, because you're raised in a culture and because you're raised with certain expectations, that you don't get exposed to certain things. So, like changing diapers, or like being a primary caregiver. So for some men, that's a change, and that's new for them, and that can be difficult. So how do we honor that within the church, those changing roles? Because we tend to have mommy and me, Mother's Day out kind of programs. Like, is it just a matter of changing that language? Is language that important? Or are there other things that we need?
Well, I mean, I think language is important, and how we go about talking about it matters. Not just the words we use, but the cultural awareness that we put behind what we're talking about. But, my take has always been in a setting of worship, that's what we're there for, is worship. We're not here to recognize cultural events, unless it's a significant big one, then you need to, something unusual, then you need to call attention because people may need help through it. I tend to not bring Mother's Day or Father's Day or New 4th of July or anything like that into the church.
Where I've seen it done well in the Episcopal Church is during our prayers of the people. An extra prayer added into there, and that's an appropriate place to kind of put that in there. But you've got father and mother stuff going on in the church. You often have, a parents' night out, or a Mother's Day out, or a mommy and me kind of group. and those tend to be very mother centric, and that kind of feeds into this expectation that mothers are a certain thing and that fathers are a certain thing. I mean, how do you address that, or do you address that from within your church?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough question. I mean, because there are, mommy and me type of outings are actually really important,
Absolutely.
and
I mean, you think about
you see a lot of growth in children sometimes through things like that. I would just say that we need to be aware that maybe if we're going to do one for one particular for the mothers, then maybe you ought to also consider doing something similar for the fathers or something together. I mean, I think they all have their value, but if you're going to do one, I would say be sure you have the resources to do more than one.
Although I will say, in my experience, when I've gone to like dad groups,
Mm.
even with primarily stay-at-home dads, they tend to be these hyper masculine affairs where all the dads get together and they talk about all the repairs that they're doing to their house, and they drink their beer, and they do like very masculine things. And I'm just sitting there want to be like, how often is your kid pooping? I want to check in and do all the childcare and thing, but they want to talk about the deck that they built, and I'm going, I don't know how to build anything at all.
Well, I'll
Like
come build your deck for you. Okay.
The planter boxes I built tend to be more trapezoidal than horizontal or rectangular. So, I don't do parallel lines very well.
I understand. Well, I mean, and that's the challenge right there, is that there still is, there are the guys who buy completely into the kind of societal presentation of what does it mean to be male.
And that's not wrong.
No, some people live into it and enjoy life that way.
And some people really do enjoy building stuff and are really good at it.
I enjoy building stuff. You say that like it's.
No, I say that because I'm jealous. Basically.
Oh, okay, all right.
I get that out of a sense of envy, because everything I've tried to build, I wind up going to my wife and saying, "Hey, can you fix this? Because I've completely messed it up."
Too funny.
We like to joke that she and I have a very traditional 1950s marriage, just kind of in reverse. But yeah. So we're talking about fathers. This Sunday's Father's Day. I mean, what does Father's Day look like for Mark Sandlin?
Well, for me, I'll find some time to go spend with my dad, and I'll bring him a card that really, and I spend a lot of time looking for the right card that really says what I think. And I'll just appreciate the time I have with him. Now, I also try to do that every week or so.
Yeah.
Whether it's Father's Day or not. Now, since it's actually Father's Day, I will go because I want to be with him, and I want my kids to see that. And I would hate for him to not have like his kids show up on Father's Day.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting because you think about being a father and what that means when you become a father, and suddenly, especially for me, all those things that when you're a teenager or you're a young adult and you're kind of bristling against your parents and your dad, or you're thinking about all the things you'll do differently than your parents. It's kind of funny because once you have kids, a lot of that goes out the window, and you suddenly become a lot more compassionate towards your parents, and you're finally like, you did an okay job. You did an okay job. I survived childhood. So
there's some truth. There's some truth. I mean, I always looked up to my dad, so I never really did the kind
Same
of
here.
the kind of traditional like distance yourself from your parents kind of thing. I've always respected him and had a high value of his opinion. So.
But parents and your parenting styles are big news right now. You've got the stuff that went on at the zoo with the child who fell into the gorilla cage. You've got the parents who tragically lost their child to an alligator in Florida, and so you have people who get really judgmental about how we parent and what parenting looks like for men and women. And I want there to be a lot more compassion towards the difficult work that parenting is for people, both for fathers and for mothers.
Right. I think that's just like a symptom of our larger problem with feeling like everyone needs to be exactly like we are. I mean, because it's not just with parenting.
I disagree, and I think you should agree with me.
Okay, I'm wrong. Wait a minute. How'd you do that? No, I just mean, that's a lot of our hate and fear come out of this
Absolutely.
thing of wanting people to be more like us or fearing the thing that's not like us. And I think sometimes that's what happens in the parenting model too, is that you put your opinion of what is right up on someone else, and if you don't take the time to consider whether or not what they're doing might actually be really great parenting skills, just not like yours.
Yeah, and part of it is when a tragic event like that happens, it presses all those triggers that we have of parents of losing our kids or something like that happening. I think we tend to project that fear by saying that would never happen to us, or that could never happen to us. So those people must be bad parents and not like us,
Right.
which is the same thing of fearing things that are different than us. Anyway, so we've talked a little bit about fathers, we've talked a little bit about language, and we've talked a little bit about church. And I feel like the big elephant in the room that we probably ought to talk about, since we're both ministers, is some of the father language that we have in the Bible and how that has played out within Christian history, and how that's happened and affected both men and women in our understandings of God. So let's drop some music and come back on the other side and hello and welcome back to round 2 of the Moonshine Jesus Show. Mark, I feel like before we get started, I should check in with you to see if your beer is still amazing.
It is still amazing. It's only about half there now. I do have something. I just need to make sure I heard this right at the end of the last segment. I'm pretty sure that you called God an elephant.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
You know, it's like it's that great metaphor. We can only feel part of the elephant
That's
one
right.
time.
Right.
I thought we were on the same page here. So
you were going to a meta level of that God's a metaphor.
That's right. Okay, so that actually brings up an interesting point about our language for God and our names for God. Like, how do we name God?
Yes.
Because, every Sunday, pretty much, in most Christian churches, we are calling God Father. Right?
Yes, and Him.
And Him and He and that's, we understand, traditionally Christianity has understood God as male, correct?
Oh, it's interesting to watch the way that even progressives will fight tooth and nail to hold on to that language. It's not just that we call. Yeah.
Why? Why is that? That's what I have a hard time, because it is just as easy to say the word God than it is to say he or him. And I get sometimes you want something that flows a little bit better.
But it only takes a little bit of work to rearrange a sentence so you don't need a pronoun. Yeah. And honestly, once you've done it for a little while, you do it without even thinking.
It becomes second nature in a lot of ways.
Right. It's not hard. It's not difficult.
Because the way you use that language does begin to shift your understanding and conception of God.
Sure, absolutely. Well, it's kind of like we talked about in the first segment of that. There are people out there who have a negative image of Father, and putting God in that category can become very problematic to their spiritual journey.
I was doing a retreat once for a group of women, and we were talking about this naming of God.
Right.
And we were doing it through the Lord's Prayer, and I collected several different versions of the Lord's Prayer, and one shifted the language from father imagery to mother imagery. And there were a lot of different opinions about that within this group of women, but one woman shared about her father who was abusive towards her, and just for the first time she had conceived of God as something other than her abusive father. Right. And it was really an important moment for her spiritually. And so I don't think we should underestimate the power of that language to damage and limit people's understandings of God and the way they can access the divine.
I completely agree, and that's why I don't understand why people wouldn't be more agreeable to using non-gendered language for God. If you talk to them, they'll agree that God doesn't have a gender.
Yeah, or if you use gendered language from God, use different genders at different times. Mm-hmm. Which can sometimes be more disorienting for people than just.
I take the perspective of, if a person is wanting to grow their relationship closer with God, and they've come to this community in order to do that, it's beholden to the community to not use any gendered language for that God, because you don't know their stories, you don't know what's helpful, you don't know what's hurtful, but we do know that it's very possible that using he or she could be bad for them. It's so easy not to. So why, in something so important, would we not just choose?
And our English language is so terribly binary.
Exactly.
The way our language is constructed is on this male-female binary with our pronouns, and that's where I think trans people have done a great service and opened up a really interesting avenue because they've reclaimed the they and them as singular pronouns,
right.
as options for use, and that's a really compelling idea that I don't know if I would have nearly as much of a theological problem with than he.
Oh, I definitely wouldn't have as much of a theological problem with they or them as I do with him because it's non-gendered, which works
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
But the gendered stuff, I think, is just so problematic. I actually wrote a piece, a sermon called "Paternal Concerns,"
Mm,
and it was about my daughter, and it
yeah.
was about the church that I was out at the time, and I said, the masculine language. I have a boy and a girl. The masculine language leaves my daughter feeling like my son is more in the image of God than she is.
Right.
I can't live with myself if I let her grow up that way.
If God is male, then male is God. Which
Right. I
I think
mean,
it was Rosemary Ruther who said that.
yeah, it's hard to
Um,
escape that. I mean, it's just
yeah.
part of how our heads work.
Well, and it also has set up and constructed the system of church that we have, which tends to prefer and privilege men over women. I mean, the stained glass ceiling is a real thing.
Yeah.
And the way we treat women within the church as leaders is a real thing, and I think is affected by that language. But I also think we have to talk about the very real fact that Jesus himself calls God by Father. And that's what people tend to bring up is
Right.
that, when Jesus teaches his disciples to pray, he says, Our Father,
Right.
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And so how do you deal with that? Because I've got my own way that I tend to talk about that, but I'm
Sure.
curious, how do you talk about that?
I mean, for me, I just talk about the way that the culture was at that particular point in time, and that if you're wanting to talk about someone who is the parent of this gathering, of this brotherhood, of this sisterhood, of this church that's out there, um, back in those times, the only language you had was father, because if you use the word for mother, well, moms were not the category of standards that they are here and now. So it's below the father, and there is an ownership that goes on, and there's particular duties that are expected of it. And so they couldn't have. There wasn't another word that they could have used in order to express what they were trying to express about God. That it was a more personal God, but still in a parental kind of point of being. But the father language was the only one that worked. Mother language would have taught something completely different that wasn't true as far as what Jesus understood about God.
So it's a cultural way of understanding one's relationship with
Yeah.
God.
If
And so
anything,
in today's world,
that's
and
right.
in today's world, we have different cultural understandings of our relationship to both mothers and fathers and
Right.
parents and uncles and sisters and all that kind of stuff.
Sure, absolutely. If anything, I think it ends up being an argument for why you should be using other language, because frequently in our modern times we see mothers who are in charge of the house and are the ones that are keeping things running the way they're supposed to, and make life better for the children.
They're the householder in a way.
Yeah. So
the other way to approach it is to think about how we name God ourselves and
Right.
naming God out of our own experiences. And I don't think one could argue. I mean, I think you could argue, but I think it's difficult to argue that Jesus didn't experience and understand God as Father, because I think in Jesus's baptism that was his experience of God, and so to me it just seems natural that Jesus names and calls God Father out of Jesus' own experience. Much in the same way that Abraham refers to God as the shield,
sure.
and much as Jacob refers to God, it's slipping my mind, but and Isaac especially refers to God as the fear of Isaac.
Right.
Isaac's name for God is the fear.
Right.
And so it makes sense because of what happened and what Isaac's experiences of God was.
Right. And speaking of naming of God and people's experience, I think it's also important to point out that biblically we have lots of examples that aren't masculine of God. We have on eagles.
We have lots of different names.
We have on eagle's wings, which is what a mother eagle does. It speaks of in the prodigal child. It talks about how rushing to his child or holding the child like a mother nurses a baby, or
right,
something like that. There's these lots of imagery like that. And El Shaddai,
and there's positive and negative imagery. I mean, I keep going back to Isaac, who calls God the fear. and this is grounded in his experience of almost being sacrificed, of being bound on the mountain by his father. And so we talk about God out of our own experiences.
Yeah, I tell you, it might be a good way to wrap up here, talking about God out of our own experiences. And I talked about a moment ago about how I would never want my daughter to feel like my son is more in the image of God than she is. So as I was writing that sermon, I started thinking about all of this. And so I sat down with her. She was about 6 at the time. And we talked about what God was like and what she knew about God. And I ultimately said, so is God a boy or a girl? And she said, basically, I don't know. And I said, well, that's good, because you shouldn't know, because God's neither. And so she used to do the Lord's Prayer every night as her bedtime prayer. And so I told her, since she had come to this on her own, I said, why don't you come up with some name that you want for God rather than our Father? And her solution was Creator.
Very nice.
Our Creator who art in heaven. So, I mean, even at 6 years old, you can find ways around that language that's not hurtful.
Absolutely. And that's generative, and that's creative.
Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Won't you shine a light?
Hello, and welcome to round 3 of the Moonshine Jesus Show. This is our AMA segment, and I'm going to jump right into this, David, because we've got a fantastic question here.
Okay.
Actually, a question that was already had the answer supplied.
Worried.
Has the answer supplied. What would Jesus drive? WWJD.
Oh, it's easy. An Accord, because
he and the disciples have one Accord. You're wrong.
All in one Accord. Oh, what?
Yeah, they would drive a Chrysler.
Oh, God.
Okay, no. Okay, you ready? Here's a real question.
Lord.
Here's an actually interesting question.
That was a dad joke. I want to be clear how
That was a
appropriate
very
that was
bad
for our
dad
Father's
joke.
Day, because that was clearly
That's
a
right.
dad joke.
I heard a great dad joke on Jimmy Fallon last night. One person says every time they go to the bathroom, their dad says, "Hey, mention my name, you get a good seat." Here's the question. What would the Good Samaritan have done if he had arrived a few minutes earlier when the robbers were still there?
Well, I don't know, because I don't think that was the story Jesus was telling.
That's exactly what I thought too. It's funny that my thought was, well, it was a parable, and so there was a whole point of him arriving after the robbers, and it's not a real person, so I don't know.
I mean, I think the story presumes that there's violence in the world. I mean, at a baseline, I think the story presumes that there's going to be violence and pain and tragedy in the world.
Yeah, my guess is that this person's trying to get us to say whether or not the helpful Samaritan would have used violence to scare off the robbers or something.
I don't know.
My other thought was, well, who's telling this version of the story? If it's Jesus, I don't know. Probably what they would do is just ask if they could replace the person they're beating up.
Well, yeah, you think about his response to the woman caught in adultery, the idea of standing between. And you see images of that in protests around the world. There's particularly evocative images of Greek Orthodox priests standing in between lines of police officers.
Yeah,
right,
that would be my guess. That would be my ultimate guess. If that's okay. Moving on. This comes from that first question was from Bill Tamarius, and that one I just read was from Timothy Reeder.
Good questions, though. Good questions.
Interesting questions. Here's a great question, 2 of them, from Stacy Highfield. What is the greatest joy in your life right now?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. No, I'm asking the listeners.
It feels kind of cliche to say this since we're doing a Father's Day episode, but really and truly, my kids and being a dad, is the greatest joy I have right now. Just getting. Yeah, it can also be one of the greatest challenges.
Sure. Well, that goes to our second question. What is your most difficult challenge?
I'm going to double down and say my kids.
There you go. I think that's very fair. And you know what? On a Father's Day special, it's probably the ultimate best place to end. And so we'll stop chatting and let them get to what they're really listening for, and that's a little Freddie Fry.
it's all wrong. They make it so easy to just tag along. The prayers go to heaven, your liver to hell. Your mind can't believe that they planned this so well. Moonshine and Jesus, yes, that is the way. They get us to give up our souls every day.